Good morning, everyone. As was stated earlier, I'm Natalie Lehr-Lopez. I'm the Executive Director of the DNI's Supply Chain and Counterintelligence Risk Management Task Force. But I'm not here today to talk about the task force. I'm here to help moderate a fireside chat with Jason Barrett. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of his background to kind of talk about more about his position in relationship to OSINT at the DNI. We're truly honored here to be today. Thank you to SANS for the invitation to reach out to all of you. Jason was selected as the DNI's OSINT executive, and he was appointed in 2023. He's the first person to hold this position, so if you'll bear with me to allow him to go over a few of his accolades to show you how truly unique he was in bringing his 2 decades of skills and experience to this role. Before the establishment of the OSINT executive, he was the deputy director of the ODNI's Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center, chief of FBI's Asia Cyber Intelligence Unit, the executive assistant to the DNI. He was the president's daily briefer to the National Security and Homeland Security advisors. He's also served as the National Counterterrorism and Security Center's representative to New York City and Chicago. There's a whole host of contributions to national security that resulted in both the FBI's Director's Award for Exceptional Public Service and 2 DNI Distinguished Service Awards. So he kind of knows some things about OSINT and security. In his current role, it's really about emphasizing the importance of OSINT and its use in the modern intelligence landscape. And we're hoping he could come today and talk about all these activities that he's piloting to really allow OSINT to drive the core intelligence activities across the enterprise. So first, Jason, thank you so much for agreeing to join everyone today. And I was hoping you could do a brief overview, although I highlighted the titles, but a brief overview of how you're harnessing the expanse of that experience into this new role.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. For those of you who don't know Natalie, you really should. She has an encyclopedic knowledge base on supply chain and related issues, whether it's regulation or, frankly, vulnerabilities. And so if you ever see her walking around these events, I would really encourage you to go up and introduce yourself as well. But it's a pleasure to be here today. Really a pleasure to talk to you all. I'm only sorry that I can't see what's going to be up on the screen iteratively as we keep talking to see whatever the chatbot is putting up in the Fireside chat window. But other than that, getting back to how my background is really informing how I'm approaching the OSINT role, I'd kind of look at it this way. I've been in the trenches producing all source analysis, dozens of PDBs for various administrations over the years. I've also delivered those products at the highest levels. And then I've been in operational roles, and I've been in the field and at headquarters. And the through point for me, or the through line, is the most impactful products, the most impactful analysis, the most impactful operations are oftentimes carried out by a really small group of individuals. And what is a consistent hallmark of those individuals is a willingness to kind of refine their trade craft and their practice, and to constantly look for ways to learn and to grow. And they also challenge conventional wisdom repeatedly. And I think those are characteristics that are really essential for today's OSINT analyst, who is not just having to deal with a flood of information, but also is put in a position where their access to information, oftentimes coming in, almost entirely from unclassified means, is more informative and potentially a faster delivery mechanism than more exquisite collection that the IC might have in the classified realm. And so for me, it's really important to kind of pull that thread, in my current role, and to really empower the community in that space. It has been a community that has not really received a lot of support over the years, mostly because there was I think it's not surprising that, frankly, a lot of the classified collection gets most of the attention. But in my view, we really need to make that taxpayer dollar go farther. And in a lot of ways, today's world, from an OSINT perspective, gives us an extraordinary amount of data and knowledge to be able to drive insight much faster.
Yeah, and if I can add color commentary,
Yeah,
because I
please.
love to do that, in that we support the supply chain review process across the DNI directly, so all 18 members. And it probably won't surprise you to know that a lot of the information that the federal government, even the intelligence community, relies upon for those reviews is unclassified data. We procure goods and services from the same global markets that you all do. And we find that the timeliness of the information is extremely valuable to us. Even though we may have exquisite insights that are the byproduct of the intel community, it's the speed of the decision-making and the contract process, which is so valuable. And exactly why I think that there was a great sort of driver for the establishment of an OSINT executive to harmonize these activities that were otherwise federated.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. It's a position that ultimately is about synchronizing activities, but we've really tried to focus on if we put in place guardrails or if we provide guidance in certain areas, there's an unpacking as to why. And then we're also trying to pair it with creative solutions that allow for activities or collection or operations that can be accelerated because of the policy, not in spite of the policy. So we're trying to think better about how we ensure mission success as opposed to how we inhibit it.
How do you take the otherwise federated model and create a strategy behind that as part of your sort of incoming duties of this new executive? Can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, so if you look at, obviously, even just sitting and hearing some of these presentations, the emerging technologies and capabilities that are out there and the flood of data, is giving us an opportunity right now to really leverage the unclassified space in a much more productive and efficient pathway. And so what the strategy does, it's very high level, but it was publicly released on purpose so that it can help drive a lot more of a conversation in venues like this and then subsequently. But the whole point there is, how can we take this information and both access it much faster and deliver it to policymakers much faster? Not just policymakers, but warfighters, those on the edge. And we want to be able to do both things. But in order to do that, we've got to have a professionalized, integrated, and structurally independent open source cadre. Those who are empowered to do that work on a day in and day out basis, and those who, frankly, are given the resources and the capabilities to be able to leverage that much faster, so that we keep the data on the low, end, low side. For those of you who aren't familiar kind of with our speak in the IC, we've got to keep the data in the unclassified domain as much as possible instead of replicating it numerous times across our infrastructure.
There have been some discussions referring to open source information as the int of first resort. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think whether you're talking about publicly or commercially available information, what is increasingly the case, and frankly, you've seen it play out in policy discussions or legislative discussions over the last couple of years in a number of different ways. But this information is foundational to the entire intelligence community apparatus. It does not matter which int or collection you are talking about, whether it's SIGINT, HUMINT, GEOINT, MASINT, or OSINT. It is foundational, publicly and commercially available information to all of those, and oftentimes goes unnoticed as far as the extent to which it is serving as a guiding light in some of the collection. And so because of that, it has been over the years fully integrated, in silos within those collection disciplines to help tip and cue or to help inform certain types of collection, but it has never really been professionalized on its own, as a collection discipline. And so what ends up happening, and has happened over the years, is an extensive use of it, but not a coordinated use of it. And more than that, the resources oftentimes, because the open source information is horizontally delivered instead of vertically, what ends up happening is it gets repackaged in other types of information and then goes vertical to the policymakers or out to operators. And it's used because it's been enriched and packaged with other types of information, but the benefit does not redound to the OSINT community in the sense of where it's coming from, where some of that information is coming from. It oftentimes just goes back down to the place in which it was packaged. And so what we are trying to do is a much more holistic look at how do we acquire it, how do we use it, how do we treat it, how do we then professionalize not just the collection, but the productization of it, and then streamline the delivery so that we're not just putting out individual reports or OSINT collection to our horizontal colleagues, so to speak, but we're also developing more standalone capability for policymakers and those who can operationalize it.
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of key points there with respect to just the volume, the growing need to serve many stakeholders across the federal government to include our partners. I think to give you some background on the task force, the DNI's SCRIM task force is by authority intended to serve the entire federal enterprise, the acquisition enterprise. So the ability to have ready access to valuable OSINT insights helps us to accelerate that conversation at time of need, and just gives us visibility that we might not otherwise have with our internal holdings. So there's a lot of ongoing work still about validating that information, aligning it, with other data sets and other holdings. But I think what we've found is the preference for the visibility or access into that data to help inform these decisions while working through how we validate, rely upon that material and share it. But I think, highly valuable process. There's a growing variety of this data. How are you as the OSINT executive reaching out to all of those stakeholders and making sure that you're picking the most appropriate data for the totality of uses that you seem to be overseeing, at least in part?
Yeah, I think a couple of ways to look at this issue. Let's think about it from a commercial perspective. As you can see here and at any number of conferences that you might go to, there are no shortage of industry capabilities out there, and those are growing by the day. And it's a good thing. It is. We need that creative energy and those ideas as far as the different types of ways to enrich data, different collection capabilities, and the different platforms. The problem is it becomes overwhelming for those of us in the government to figure out how to best decide where to go. And then you get into situations where there might be a poor approach from an acquisition perspective, and you get locked into a certain single vendor for an extended period of time, and it doesn't allow for the resources to go very far, and you don't create competitive dynamics that allow us to have more access to more vendors. So what we're trying to do is rethink that, and we're looking at a variety of options, but one of the things that I think is a foundational element that we're now going to really try and seed into our approach to commercial data and platforms is this idea of keeping the data low as much as possible, and then architecting and using the technology that is available to us to query that data, or in some cases be able to get on platform and do the searches that we need if we can do it in ways that are have some security to them. But there's no reason why we need to continue to approach things in a way that just bulk ingests data and then replicates it. What it tends to do is get us into a situation where we only do that instead of thinking about a broader array of options. And then it ends up keeping us relatively narrowly minded and narrowly focused into certain types of vendors. And so what we're trying to do is prevent or provide some optionality to the IC in this space. And we're looking at a comprehensive solution over the next year or two that we're hoping to roll out that will start to get the IC into a better space in this area at a much lower cost long
There are also certain types of security functions or concepts where OSINT is more readily applicable. Supply chain among them, for all the reasons I described. We purchase goods and services just like you from the market. But also emerging technology. You know, there's so much dynamism in that space, and there is an alignment between just the volume of insight and visibility that folks might have from that data store. So are you focusing on particular types of data like emerging technology to help inform decisions yet to be made?
Yeah, of course. So, you know, I think this has been publicly discussed quite a bit, but our OSINT community was one of the first parts of the IC to really roll out a generative AI capability as part of our day-to-day activities. Our agency partners were instrumental in doing that. And then there's other aspects of the community that are doing some really important work related to different branches of the AI tree, so to speak. So whether you're talking about Gen AI, computer vision, machine learning, what we ultimately want to get to is a more integrated capability in that area that will allow us to move much faster with inference and insight to drive those products and those capabilities for decision makers much faster. But I think when you do those types of things, or as you're planning for that kind of capability, one of the things that Natalie can appreciate this, at least from an IC perspective, we have to get back into our tradecraft and think about how are we applying the guardrails from a tradecraft perspective to ensure that the data is being structured in a way or is being tagged in a way that is trackable from the point of origin to point of delivery, and then is trustworthy in where it's coming from and how it's being leveraged. And so my office put out about 2 months ago an updated intelligence community standard on citing PAI, CAI, and OSINT in overarching products across the IC. And what that did is really took a more modern approach to citations in applying or including a lot more of the AI, machine learning, computer vision capabilities, and certain types of data we're not going to be able to understand necessarily exactly where it's coming from, but we have to understand models, biases, the capabilities that are being applied to that data, and then how it's being packaged. And that needs to go into how the citations are ultimately captured in analytic products or other types of products. So we're trying to think through those things, put it out there, and then publicly release that, really so that we can drive more of a collective approach that isn't just biased towards the IC, but ultimately is informed by industry as well.
So extremely valuable. I can say from a supply chain perspective, we refer to folly as a risk in and of itself, and that's fear of liability and litigation interests. So every time the government issues a contract and someone does not win that contract, there are challenges to the process by which it's undertaken and the information relied upon in that process. So citations may not sound extremely fascinating to all of you, but those of you who may also have drivers adjacent to or directly correlated with folly, it's extremely valuable to justify the basis, the substantive basis of your determination. Outside of that, we are the intelligence community, and so it raises a few specters with respect to how OSINT information is used. And I wonder if you could just offer some thoughts about, outside of what guidance you've already issued, how you're focusing on protections for privacy and civil liberties while using that data.
Yeah, so some of you may have seen, if you've not read it, I don't blame you, but we publicly released the commercially available information policy this last May. It was the first time we had an IC-wide policy that kind of guides our use of commercial data and in particular sensitive commercial data. This is obviously related to the overarching discussion that's taken place in a variety of locations and from whether it's policy or legislative or otherwise. The foundational element there is we need to make sure as an IC that we are, when we acquire information, we know exactly where it's coming from to the greatest extent possible. We are able to then shed the information or prevent even the acquisition of certain types of information. We can help reframe through contract language the types of information that we're interested in acquiring so that we're not bringing on board more sensitive types of data. And ultimately what this is getting to is a much more thoughtful and standardized approach to the types of information that we, from an IC perspective, might leverage on a day-to-day basis, and building trust and confidence over time, not just within our community, but with the American people and with others, that the data that we're using to drive and inform our insights is collected and acquired and maintained in a way that, from a first principle perspective, is protecting privacy rights. And then as it's used over time, we try not to even bring in sensitive data to the greatest extent possible. But in certain circumstances where that might need to be the case, it is treated within defined parameters that are standardized across the IC, and then it's documented, and then it's, from a transparency perspective, is provided. We have annual reports that are now required. And I think ultimately what this does is it ensures accountability, it ensures transparency, and it is a repeatable process that over time will hopefully start to build more and more confidence.
Yeah, and I can kind of describe some of how that works for the supply chain function. There is an annual training requirement to be respectful of how those queries are conducted and making sure that the folks who are accessing data are doing so consistent with their responsibilities in their role. And I think that's a valuable foundation upon which, and I love the concepts that you were describing about the transparency and the release of sort of those strategies. Just because no longer is the IC the traditional intelligence community hiding between or behind guns, gates, and guards. But I think there's a desire to lean in more with respect to our strategies because they might be beneficial to other folks to model and also to apply. So sometimes it was me. There we go. I am musical, but not in that way. Sometimes the value that the intelligence community can bring to this exact moment is we have 40 years of experience thinking about strategic competition. And, that is that experience, that muscle memory, that insight can be valuable. So I love just the concept of the willingness to share that information, to make it clear. We on the inside, and this is where I will wax lyrical for a bit, would describe the AG guidelines that govern how we would access data of a certain type. But beyond that, there hasn't traditionally been the kind of transparency that you seem to be willing to offer in this case. And again, I think there's a dual purpose to that. It's the public trust piece, but also there could be something behind that methodology that might be useful for all of you.
Ultimately, what this is getting to is building up confidence and capability within the OSINT ecosystem. And I think that works both ways. It serves to benefit those who are not in government because it bolsters the idea here that this is a valuable capability that industry and the corporate world and frankly a variety of other places should seek to leverage on a day-to-day basis. But also within government, the ability for us to leverage these data sources, again, whether we're acquiring it from a commercial perspective or we're doing our own collection from a publicly available perspective, being able to do that more holistically and drive those insights, it allows us to, when I was driving in a car or when I was sitting in the car with a national security advisor, she didn't care if the information came from the most sensitive information or publicly available information. What was needed was, is this reliable? Is this, is it accurate? Is it timely? And does it help inform my decision making? Is it relevant to me today? If it fits those characteristics, it doesn't matter where it's coming from. And I think that ultimately needs to be the framework in which we're looking at all of this information and deciding where to go for the certain types of insights that we need. And again, I go back to this idea that it is foundational. The open source ecosystem is foundational to the entire intelligence community's work. And so whether you're working counterterrorism or you're working cyber or you're working Asia-related or China-related issues, it is essential to our understanding of what is going on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I would say that partnerships are also extremely valuable to build capacity. Can you describe a little bit about, that is me. Thank you so much about that. Can you describe a little bit about how this implicates relationships that you'd otherwise have with external partners like industry and academia, either in new ways or even in the volume of those touch points?
Yeah, and even foreign partners. So one of the things that I would like to see more of is the ability to leverage this information to drive more rapid information sharing between partners. And this could be domestic too, from a perspective of informing from a threat perspective what's going on, but could oftentimes be allowing our military colleagues or State Department colleagues to drive much more engagement on a day-to-day basis with their partners, using information that's current, timely, and relevant to what they're doing without having to go through a really long time lag or a much more bandwidth-intensive work process or workflow of collecting the information, enriching it on the high side, and then going through a declassification process that ultimately gets to a product that may not be even as helpful as what we could have delivered through an open source product more rapidly. So it's really rethinking how we do our day-to-day work, and in that sense, I would also like to ultimately see us get to a place where, from an open source perspective, we're working, when possible, side by side with partners in academia and industry. We're not there yet. I think in other parts of the government, there is some really interesting use cases where they found some shoots of success. I don't think it's scalable yet, but certainly within our ecosystem, that is an area where I would like to see us explore a lot more. Instead of talking about it in the euphemistic sense of like we have to do more public-private partnership, it's what does that actually mean for us? It means we should leverage the open source environment for what it is, and that allows us to work literally side by side with our colleagues who are out of government as well, or our partners, and in that way get to insights much faster.
Yeah, from a supply chain perspective, we talk a lot about our interdependencies with our suppliers, with critical infrastructure. And I think part of the challenge has been the corpus of data we were using were perhaps unique and disconnected. Whereas now we're trying to build bridges to a more common understanding, because if, frankly, we don't have at least a similar view on a problem, it's difficult to solution. So I love the concept that you described about accelerating, deepening those conversations, but also how the foundation of that understanding can be more readily actioned upon at time of need. In the supply chain context, we've had lots of, and we were waxing lyrical on the way here to ourselves, about just the cost of inaction, right? Or in late action. And in the supply chain universe, what we found is if the government informs industry of a risk presented by a source or a product late, for ourselves even, it's 3 times the cost to replace that good or service. So this thing about what does a decision maker care about, is it accurate, is it reliable, and does it drive towards a conclusion or a solution in a conversation? And I can't think of a more relevant hint to really cover the totality of that expanse in the threat environment other than an OSINT. And again, I think it's a testament to your experience that you were selected to lead this otherwise Herculean effort in the DNI, but also make sure that there's the public trust and engagement, and then the institutionalized use of that. So can you speak a little bit to the career development and talent development? Because anything new comes with the need to educate and inform people who might be reskilling and then retooling people from other disciplines into this effort.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why I agreed to come here, is because ultimately, from an OSINT perspective, we've got to bring on board individuals who, from a personal perspective, see it as a critical requirement that they are constantly refining and improving their skill set and able to leverage technology to make themselves better on a day-to-day basis. We want to see more of an incorporation of current and emerging technology into day-to-day use. And that also means from an IC perspective, we've got to get more comfortable, allowing people to leverage those capabilities where they're at instead of forcing them to do that at home from a learning perspective. That is there's a cultural aspect of that obviously needs to change or it needs to accelerate within the IC. But what we're trying to do is really look for those people who understand how to leverage the tools that are at their fingertips to get those insights much faster instead of those of us like me who grew up in a world in which from an all source perspective, other than having some data science background, you weren't, what you were expected to do was just spend inordinate amount of time reaching or studying and coming up with ultimately a strategic product that was nice to have, but may not be as timely for that policymaker as what you could do today with the technology at hand. And so I think, again, it's one of those things where a place like this, a session like this helps me reinforce this idea of leveraging technology, continually getting additional training, pursuing those skill sets that ultimately you can become that 10x capability an analyst or targeter or researcher for us.
So for folks in the audience that might be interested in keeping track of the effort that you're doing within the IC, what's the best way for them to do that? And then what are your sort of thoughts about what's on the horizon or things even to come?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've publicly released, so over the last year, we've redefined what it means, what OSINT actually as a definition is for the IC. We put out a new IC strategy. We put out, the CAI policy framework. We've released an RFI related to the types of, the new re-envisioned approach to commercial data acquisition. We've done the IC standards for citing PAI and CAI in products. All of that has been publicly released. You can find it on ODNI.gov, but all of it except for the RFI, that's on SAM.gov. But ultimately what we're trying to reinforce here is that our work is accessible. It is something that we want to actually develop standards that are consistent with what industry is doing as well. So welcome the feedback along the way, and as we can iteratively improve in this process, we want to. My hope is that ultimately we are recruiting, retaining the right people at the right time, and providing them, with the right data, so that they can bring those skills to bear and deliver those insights much faster than what they have maybe historically been delivered. So I'm personally optimistic about the long term when it comes to this ecosystem in particular. I see it not just as an obvious place of significant growth from the value and volume of the data, but also from a value proposition in and of itself. We need to find ways to be more efficient. We need to find ways to leverage the capabilities at our hands instead of recreating them within the government. And to me, I see this place from an OSINT ecosystem as where we're going to be able to deliver greatest value for the American taxpayer long term.
Yeah, I again really appreciate that you were selected for this role because I get to derive the benefit from the broader strategy while knee deep in 74 million contract actions across the federal government every year. So I just want to thank you for what you've expressed today. And then also just offer that, please feel free, if to the extent that it involves a supply chain counterintelligence issue, to reach out to me as well. That is my job, to make sure that we have a forward-facing engagement. But know that behind the scenes at the corporate level of the DNI, there's a broader strategy to talk about how this data is used and the many purposes that it may serve. So to the extent, you're interested in that, please feel free to go to the DNI.gov website. and to look at the strategy and the artifacts. But I don't think there's any other challenge to the notion about the centrality of OSINTs in the future for a whole host of uses. So thank you for everything you do every day. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you both for this very insightful talk. 1 second, please, because I've got 2 questions that
Sure.
I'm hoping that you're willing to answer from the audience. And I'm going to read them because it's just a lot of text and I can't remember it. 1 question, typically for you, Jason. Are there similar efforts in other countries comparable to what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm talking routinely with partners who are trying to figure out the best way to architect their longer term, not just OSINT community, but the broader intelligence approach. I think it's widely understood that this is an area of growth, and trying to understand how best to not just deal with it now, but there's probably some folks in here, Maureen's probably in here as a hockey player who will appreciate the analogy of creating, you want to skate, help people skate to where the puck is going, not to where it is now. And I think ultimately there are a number of different countries who are really trying to think through this in a smart, more holistic way about building an OSINT ecosystem and an apparatus that helps them not just reduce cost in aggregate, but is taking advantage of current and emerging technologies and where we think they're going, maybe not where we are confident they're at today.
Well, thank you both again for an awesome and insightful chat. Give a warm applause.